Phil gave us a brief introduction. We'll just give you a little. Phil gave us a brief introduction. We'll just give you a little bit more. So I am Victoria Brown. I'm really pleased to kind of be here, be invited, and to be able to talk to you about anti-doping. As Phil said, it's a really important subject, and wherever we can kind of spread the message, deliver education, and we're invited to talk, then we readily accept that, as I say, and want to spread the word far and wide. My background was actually in policing. So I left the police force in 2017 to start a new career in the sports sector, and I joined BC in December 2018 as the lead safeguarding officer. I became a UCAD educator only last year, but that was as my role widened and I took on responsibilities for disciplinary compliance and anti-doping as well. So I now have the responsibility for ensuring the organisation complies with the UK anti-doping assurance framework, and that as an organisation we're adhering to our anti-doping responsibilities as the national governing body. So that's me, but before we move on, I'll let Millie introduce herself as well.
Yeah, hi everyone, I'm Millie. So I'm the lead compliance officer at British Cycling. I've been here for 2 years now. So I've been delivering anti-doping education throughout that time, and as Vic said, we love it when we get the opportunity to come and talk you through your anti-doping responsibilities. So hopefully you will find that useful, and please feel free to ask questions as we go along. We are here to help, so please do shout up.
So I'm going to work on the basis that whenever I've done this before, there's a slight delay as the slides change over, but you should now be able to see a slide which goes through your responsibilities as an athlete, and I'll refer to you as athletes and riders interchangeably, so excuse me for that. But at the beginning of the year, Millie and I were delivering anti-doping education for riders on the long list for Tokyo, so those that are off to the Olympic Games in a few months' time. They have to have this education as well. And we used this slide at the end of their session to recap what had been covered, but I thought actually it was really relevant to put it at the start of this session because it gives you an overview of your anti-doping responsibilities. And what I want to do is just ask you to think about what you already know and perhaps what you don't know about each of these areas. So just running through the slide, there are a number of points there that indicate your key responsibilities and what you must do and what you must know. So one of those is that first and foremost, you have to comply with the anti-doping rules. All BC members are bound by the anti-doping rules, so it's important to know what they are. Secondly, to stay up to date with the prohibited list. So this is a list of banned substances and methods. You need to check your medication before you take it. You are responsible for what you put into your body, so you need to know what it is that you are putting into your body. And kind of off the back of that, the next point is to talk to your doctor. So if you're injured, if you're ill, if you need to take medication, then you have a responsibility to talk to your doctor and make sure that medication don't contain any banned substances. If there are no permitted alternatives, and you have to take that medication, then you must have a TUE in place if required. And we'll go through these and we'll talk about these topics in a little bit more detail shortly. But moving on to the next one is about supplements. So you must thoroughly research supplement products if you intend to use them, and make yourself available for testing. Really important, never refuse a test. That could be an anti-doping rule violation if you refuse to test. And moving on to the end of the list, if you are on a testing pool, then it is important to keep your whereabouts information accurate. And again, later on in the presentation, Millie will briefly cover the testing pools and the importance of updating this information. And then finally, this is a new responsibility. It was only brought in at the beginning of this year on the 1st of January, but you must disclose the identity of any athlete support personnel upon request by UCAD. So those are the kind of top responsibilities. Those are the things that we think you must know. So just in relation to that, I have a scale here. I know there's only a few of you on the call, but what I'd really like is just to have a think about how confident you are. with 0 being that you have no knowledge whatsoever and 10 being that you fully understand your rights and responsibilities, just take a few minutes and consider where you sit on that scale. In a second, if you're confident to do it, pop in the chat the number where you think you are. We're not going to call anybody out, we're not going to name anybody or talk about why you think you sit at that particular place on the scale, but it'll just give us a kind of a great indication of where you think or how confident you think you are in relation to kind of your anti-doping and the responsibilities that we've just ran through. Fab, thank you. So I can see everybody's kind of sitting in the middle, ranging from about 4 through to 7. So that's fantastic. So it just gives us an indication of how much knowledge you already have. But saying that, I am actually going to go back to basics and start at the beginning with the who's who. There is no rhyme or reason as to why these logos are on the order on the screen. As I say, there's nothing specific about where they are, but I'm going to start at the far right hand side, if you can see that one. So British Cycling, we are the national governing body that governs your sport. We have to comply with the national anti-doping policy and support UCAD in ensuring that all athletes receive education. And it's really important that your first experience of anti-doping is education rather than testing. Sitting there in the middle is UCAD, so in the middle of the screen, and they are the national organisation responsible for creating a UK-wide environment of confidence in clean sport. They have primary responsibility to conduct the national testing programme, to review applications for TUEs, to manage hearings and appeals and issue sanctions in relation to individuals and teams who have committed anti-doping rule violations. They've also developed the 100% Me education programme, which is the education programme that is there to help you throughout your sporting journey. And it's the information and the resources that we use when we're delivering education to athletes, to all athletes. And then lastly, on the left-hand side is WADA, so that's the World Anti-Doping Authority. Again, this organisation, it's the aim to bring consistency to anti-doping policies and regulations within sports on a global scale. The World Anti-Doping Code is the core document that ensures consistency, as I say, right across the world. And in practical application, the aim is that all athletes and athlete support personnel benefit from the same procedures and the same protections, no matter the sport, no matter your nationality or the country where you're tested. So that's a brief who's who. And I'm passing over to Millie for the next part.
Yeah, thanks, Vic. So firstly, strict liability is a principle that runs throughout anti-doping. And as Vic touched on already, you can see the 100% Me logo on the screen. So this is UCAD's value-based programme and educates athletes and support staff about their responsibilities related to anti-doping. But the clear message as well from it is on the screen there. So anything to do with anti-doping, it's your responsibility. So you're an athlete or you're a BC member, you are bound by the anti-doping code and you have certain responsibilities under their code. So Vic has touched on those already, but it's really important that in any decision you're making related to anti-doping, so whether that's a medication you need to take, taking a supplement, that you do apply this to that decision. Because if it were you to be tested and you presented a banned substance in that sample, you cannot just use the excuse of, oh, I didn't know, I wasn't too sure, I hadn't done my research. It is all your responsibility, and you need to make sure that you understand what that responsibility entails. So we will cover it, sort of the main things today, but please, if you take anything away from today, please understand it is your responsibility what goes into your body. It's a bit like training, what you put into it is what you're going to get out, but make sure you understand that and make sure you're doing your research. Okay, so if you go to the next slide, Vic. So the prohibited list. This is mentioned in Vic's list of responsibilities. It's published every year on the 1st of January, but 3 months before that, they released the updated version. So any changes which are going to be made will be listed on there. So if you have a prescription for any medication, always check, has there been any changes to the prohibited list, which might mean that your medication is now on the prohibited list. And that then gives you a good amount of time to obviously make the changes or apply for a TUE if you need to. So there's different reasons of why a medication can end up on the prohibited list. It has to meet at least 2 out of 3 of these reasons. So firstly, it either has the potential to enhance or does enhance sport performance. Secondly, it represents an actual or potential health risk to athletes. And then thirdly, it violates the spirit of sport. And if the medication does fulfill 2 of those, then it will go onto the prohibited list. Now, it's not just one person sat there writing the list themselves. So it's made in consultation with scientific, medical and anti-doping experts, and it will reflect the current scientific and medical evidence that they have to show for those reasons. They can, throughout the year, in exceptional circumstances, they can add other medications to that list, but if that happened, you would have the 3-month warning again. So as I said, when it comes out in January, it'll be released 3 months in advance. You would have that. It wouldn't just be sort of snuck on the list, as it were. You would find out, so you can make any changes you need to your prescriptions as well. Aside from the medications, I have gone on and on about if you prescribe medication, there is prohibited methods on there as well. So you do need to make sure you're aware of the different methods and also the substances which are prohibited. But we're not expecting you to go off tonight and download the prohibited list and read through it, because there's a lot of medical terms in there, and I, for one, could not sit there and read it all and understand it because I've not done medicine. So we will show you different resources you can use to make it a bit more understandable and accessible. If you can go to the next one, please, Vic. So on the screen here, there's just some medications that could come up in your day-to-day life. So for example, Lemsip, which you might take just in winter when you get the cold or flu. And even these just day-to-day occurrences, you need to now start checking so you know the status of them. And when we refer to the status of medication, what we mean is whether it's prohibited or whether it's not prohibited. So it's not that it looks like a bit of a guessing game, really, with it, especially with the amount of ingredients in these medications. But this brilliant tool, which we're about to show you, is a game changer for making sure you can do your research. So if you can go to the next one, please, Vic. This is Global Drone. And Global Drone, I think Vic would definitely agree with me, we will use it all the time. So whenever we get inquiries in, we'll always use it if people want to find out the status of their medication or they're concerned they might need a TUE. This is the first place I will go to. So it allows you to search for medications which have been bought or prescribed in certain countries, and it will tell you if the ingredients in that medication are prohibited or not, and whether they're prohibited or not within your competition, and also outside of competition. So it's really important that you make sure your information is accurate. So firstly, your medication needs to be bought or prescribed in one of the countries which the software caters to. So luckily the United Kingdom is on there, thank goodness, so we can use it, which is great because obviously the medication you're going to prescribe is here. If you go away though, or perhaps you're competing away once you go into international competitions, then that's when it's a bit trickier, and so you need to make sure you're double checking that. So if you could go on to the next one, please, Vic, for me. This is where you will enter your information. So when you go onto the website, and that's all it is, it's just a website online, so you can Google it and it will come up. This is the information you need to put in. So firstly, it will ask you for your user type, and this relates to whether you are an athlete or you are support personnel, basically. So for you guys, you would put in athlete. You then need to select your sport, so cycling. You then need to select your nation of purchase. So this is where you've bought your medication or where you prescribed it. As I said, the United Kingdom's on there, so that's brilliant. But if you're away, so perhaps you're in America, make sure you're putting that in, which is on there. Spain, however, is not. So just make sure you're double checking. they are all listed, the countries on the website as to where you can search for. And I won't just reel them off now, you're not expected to write them all down, because when you go on the website, they're all there for you anyway. And then finally, in the search for box, make sure you put in the exact name for the medication you're looking for. And this is really important because certain medications, for example, Lemsip, will have lots of different types. So you have Lemsip sachets, there's Lemsip tablets, there's different max strength, whatever. Make sure you're putting the right one in, because there could be different ingredients within different ones. And as I said before, the strict liability principle will run throughout that. So if you were going to use this as evidence, you've done your research, which you need to do, and then actually you research the wrong product, then that is obviously, they're not going to take much sympathy on that. If you go to the next one, Vic, please, you'll be able to see a result that will come up. So this is what you'll get. So you've put all your information in correctly, and here you've searched for Sudafed. This is the result you will get. So the numbers on the screen are certain things you just need to double check when you get your result. So firstly, and I know I keep saying it and it sounds like a broken record, but make sure the medication type is the right one and the name's correct. Then secondly, at point 2, check your route of administration. So this one obviously will just, there's only one there, but it might be different medications will list different types. It could be inhalation, injection, and they will have different statuses as well. So just make sure you're looking at the correct one there. And then at point 3, these are your statuses. So where it's prohibited or not. If it's green, good news, it's not prohibited, so you're fine to take it. If it's red, then it is prohibited. And this might be in competition or out of competition. Now, just a quick note on that. In competition is the period which is defined by the World Anti-Doping Code as now 11:59 the night before your competition when you're about to compete. So that's when the period would start, and it runs until the end of the competition and all the sample collection has been done. Now that's the general rule. There are exceptions. So for example, the Olympics, theirs is slightly different. So it will run from the opening ceremony till the closing ceremony. But make sure you double check that. So if you are competing, just in case, obviously, you need to take a medication and it might be prohibited in competition, make sure you're taking it way out of competition, as long as it's not prohibited out of competition. Okay, point 4 at the bottom, this is your unique search reference number. So this is really important, and this is where we're saying do your research, because this is your evidence of your research. So that shows all the information you've put in. It's a bit blurry on the screen, but it will show, and if you save this result, show where you've bought it, what you've put in as where you've bought it, what sport you put it down for, and then when you did your search. If you come along with a search that's 5 years out of date, they're not going to be very sympathetic if it's incorrect. You need to be redoing your searches. So say you do it this year, next year you get a cold again, want to take that medication again, don't rely on this year's search, do your search again and save your search result again. Keep them up to date at all times, because there could be an ingredient that's changed, or the status of the ingredient could have changed on the prohibited list. And then at the top, point 5 there gives you options of how to save your result. So you can either view it as a PDF and then save the file, or you can send it to yourself as an email. Now, a lot of our riders on program will create sort of a folder within their inbox, send it to an email and just put all those emails in a folder. If there ever comes a time they need to get back that search result, they can easily do so and it's got all that information on. But please, please, please make sure you save it as PDF or send it as an email. And then finally, if you have any questions on the result you've got, you're not too sure what it means, you can ask a question following that link to UCAD, or if you want to come to myself or Victoria, please do so. We're more than happy to help. And if we don't know the answer, we will go to UCAD and ask them. We do speak to them pretty much every day, so feel free to ask us. Okay, so if you go to the next one, Vic, I think it might be you again. Oh, it's me, sorry, it is me, but it is the end of me going on about Global Joe. I have said it as if I'm like its biggest fan, but I do think it's just the best resource you can have at the minute to use. It just makes your life so much easier. So just on medications finally, this is a Clean Talk app, and Vic referred to it before in relation to 100% Me. So this has been developed. It's got loads of useful resources on. You can get it on your phone, and if you go on there, it has all the links to sort of global dose, some other resources we're going to touch on later. And then it's also got this, which is your medications record. If you're prescribed a medication, you're taking it, it's not prohibited, but you're taking it, you can add a record to this and keep that log in your phone. So you can put all the information on there that you need. Because when you get tested, on the form, you will have to declare what you're taking at that time. And so if you've got that on your phone, it just makes it so much easier than when you're in a stressful situation, because it may be the first test you've ever had. You might be a bit panicked just because it's completely different. And so actually this just means you've got all the information, you can put it on accurately and not have to worry about it. So it's a brilliant resource. Please do download it free off the App Store. Keep it on your phone, just use it and keep updating it. And then it just saves you having to try and think of it in the moment. And now I think it is you, Vic, and I am going to stop for a second.
It is me, yeah, very briefly. It's me on therapeutic use exemptions, which I'm sure you give me because I can't say it. So I'm going to call them TUEs, which everyone will be familiar with. So Millie's spoken to you about actually checking the medication. Now I'm going to say that there is a process in place for using substances on the prohibited list for therapeutic reasons. For example, if you're ill, if you're injured. The most common medications that require a TUE are insulin for diabetes and irritable bowel syndrome, some medications for asthma, some medications to manage allergic reactions, and some medications to manage ADHD as well. So they're the most common. So if you are prescribed a medication and there are no permitted alternatives, and you've had that conversation with your doctor about potentially finding an alternative that doesn't contain a banned substance, then you may require a TUE. So the consequences are obvious. If a TUE isn't in place and you're tested, then you run the risk of returning a positive test and face a ban from the sport. The process of obtaining a TUE can take up to 30 days, so it's important that you apply well in advance if you do need one, and follow the process really carefully to avoid the application being rejected. Whether you need a TUE in advance or whether you need to apply for a retroactive TUE, so that's one where you don't apply in advance but you're tested and then you apply afterwards, and that's no later than 5 working days after the sample collection. That's going to depend on the level that you compete at. So in November last year, UCAD kind of revamped their website, revamped their medicine hub, and put some new information on their website, which has 6 new sections that take you through the TUE process in a really logical order. It also includes a TUE wizard. So it's an interactive tool. So the information that you put in will then give you an indication of whether or not you need a TUE and how to apply. All TUE applications are reviewed by a panel of independent doctors established by UCAD, and international level athletes should also apply through their international federation, so in our case the UCI, for a TUE. Again, you know, everybody's circumstances are different, so what I would advise, and Millie's a fan of Global Dro, I think the TUE Wizard on the UCAD website is also a fantastic tool because it gives you the answer and it gives you kind of the process that you need to follow. So as long as you've got the information, you put that information in about your medication, your competition level, and who you are, you will get the right results back as to what you need to do and how you need to do it. So I can't stress enough that, as I say, that's the direction to take. Go onto that website and have a look, put that information in, and you will get the right results. But again, as we've said before about checking medication, if you've got any concerns, if you've got any questions, come to us. We do speak to UCAD daily. So if we can't answer it there and then we've got somebody at the end of the phone on an email, and we will get the right response for you straight away if you had any concerns or you wanted to check any information that you've been given if you use that website. So we talk about TUEs, and as I say, they're often mentioned, but just to put it into perspective, we're actually aware that there are only 3 non-international level athletes, well, riders, so cyclists, so non-international level riders with active TUEs as of March this year. So they're not a common thing, and it's probably quite unlikely that you would actually require one. So that was, yeah, just to put that into perspective. They're not actually given out or required in large numbers, but it is very important that you check as to whether or not you need one, because as we've said, you know, the consequences are obvious if you don't check and you don't have one in place. So that was very briefly me, and it's back to you, Millie.
Thanks, Vic. So moving on from medication, we're going to have a look at supplements. And saying supplements actually covers a wide range of different products. So supplements are usually something that is used alongside your diet to enhance general health and well-being, or perhaps sporting performance. Now, it may be that you're told to take a supplement or advised on a supplement, or you hear from a friend of a really good supplement, see it online advertised for different reasons. So, for example, increasing endurance, and sometimes they're advertised as quick wins. So they would do everything you could ever want, and all you need to do is take the supplement. Now, they come with a big warning from us. There is no guarantee that any supplement is free from banned substances. When I say banned substances, I mean prohibited substances that are on the prohibited list. So it's really important, again, you do your research around these. And there's a certain resource you can use again, which is good. So if you could go to the next one, please, Vic. I'm going to show you a logo. So it may be, and it is on mine, but the videos of us all might be covering this on the right-hand side of your screen. If it is, just shove us along, because there's a logo on there for Informed Sport. Now, this is a website you can go on. It is for checking supplements. You can put in a supplement's name and batch number, and it will come up to show if it's been tested. And that's been tested for prohibited substances. Now, there is no guarantee, again, and that's at the top of the screen. This is a clear message from UCAD. There's no guarantee that it's free from banned substances. But if you're going to take one, please go and do your research on Informed Sport. Make sure you're doing those checks and saving your search results again, like you did, like we said, for medication and global drone. Now, the message from UCAD is ANORAC. So this is a set process to go through if you decide you think you need to take supplements. This stands for, firstly, assessing the need. So why do you need to take that supplement? Is it that you think you need to improve your endurance, and perhaps maybe that could be addressed by changing your diet, by changing your training schedule, how much you rest, anything like that. And I'm not here to advise you on a training schedule at all, or on what to eat. That's not what we're here for. But speak to the relevant people and take advice from those people. See if there's other options before you decide to take a supplement. And then if you still think you need to take one, and that you've decided that is your only option, so you can't just change your diet, then go and do your research. So this is the assessing the risk part. It's where you go to Informed Sport, make sure you're doing that research, putting the batch number in. The product, if it's been tested, will have the logo on it, but please be cautious. There are products out there that haven't been tested and will have a very, very, very similar logo to that one. It's just slightly different. So don't just rely on that. Please do make sure you're doing your research on the website as well. And then finally, if you've done that, you've found it on there, you're happy to use it, finally assess the consequences. You are found to have taken a supplement that contains banned substances, then you can end up with an ADRV, obviously, if you present a banned substance in your sample, and consider those consequences. I'm not going to go into loads on that because they will be covered, but please do go through that process if you decide you need to take supplements. We're not here to scare you and make it sound like it's so much work, because it's not. It's just to remind you of your responsibilities and the risks associated with supplements. Okay. I think I'm back to you now, Vic.
Yes, you are. Cheers, Millie. So moving on to the actual testing procedure. So we've talked about kind of putting those measures in place to make sure that you're not inadvertently doping or taking those substances that contain banned substances. but what actually happens in the testing procedure. So if you're called for a test, so you can be tested at any time and at any place. You can be, asked to provide a urine sample or a blood sample. You can be tested in competition and out of competition. So if a urine sample is requested, then the doping control officer will be the same gender as the athlete. If a blood sample is requested, then there will be a trained phlebotomist that does attend to take your blood sample, the blood collection officer. Just a word of advice, there are some people that have a fear of needles, that don't like having their blood taken. Just to be clear, if that is the case, please let the blood collection officer know. Again, you can't refuse a test. It's not a reason to refuse the test. The test would have to go ahead, otherwise it's an ADRV. However, if you did have a fear of needles and they were wanting to collect a sample of blood, please let them know, as I say, and they will reassure you and they will help you through the process. But don't refuse that test because of that reason. Testing plays a really key role in the fight against doping. It should be seen as a positive, and just remember it's an opportunity kind of to underline your achievements as a clean athlete. So yeah, embrace it, I think is what I'm saying, and see it as a positive thing. The DCO, so the doping control officer, does have the authority to make certain modifications to the testing procedure in certain circumstances, and that's if it's necessary to protect you and to protect the integrity of your sample as well. So, for example, if you're under 18, then you would be encouraged to have a representative with you. If you didn't want one, in the alternative, there will be 2 doping control officers that would be there during that test and will be present. Other modifications can be made as well if necessary. For example, if an athlete required assistance with holding a vessel or dividing samples due to a physical or visual or possibly intellectual impairments, then modifications can be made at that point as well. So the next slide I'm going to show you is actually a video that's been produced by UCAD, and it goes through the testing process step by step. So you may have seen it, you may not, but it clearly kind of explains what is required and how the testing process works. So hopefully this will work and everybody will be able to hear it.
Athletes can be tested anytime, anywhere, with no advance notice, as part of an anti-doping programme. Step 1. Notification of selection for a test. Athletes can be notified of selection for a test by a doping control officer, DCO, or chaperone authorised by UCAD or the relevant international federation or major event organiser. The athlete is responsible for providing suitable identification to the chaperone or DCO. This could be a passport or driving licence. It is the athlete's responsibility to stay in full view of the DCO or chaperone from the moment they are notified until completion of sample collection process. An athlete may be accompanied by a representative and an interpreter. Step 2. Reporting for sample collection. Athletes then report to the doping control station as soon as they have been notified. Under certain circumstances, an athlete may request a delay in reporting to the doping control station. Step 3. Urine sample provision. When the athlete is ready, they provide their sample. The athlete should remain in the doping control station until they are ready to do so. Athletes then select a sealed sample collection vessel, check that it is empty, clean, and the seal is intact. They can choose another sample collection vessel if in any doubt. The DCO or chaperone observing the sample provision will be the same gender as the athlete. For some athletes, those under 18 for example, there may be an additional person observing the DCO or chaperone. The athlete must remove enough clothing so that the DCO can have an unobstructed view of urine leaving the body. As much urine as possible should be passed into the vessel, but there has to be at least 90 millilitres. Anything less than 90 millilitres will be treated as a partial sample, and the athletes will be required to remain until they provided the minimum amount. The athlete then divides the sample between the A sample and B sample bottles and tightly fastens them. The DCO will check the specific gravity of the sample to ensure the urine is not too dilute for the laboratory to conduct its tests. If it is, it could result in the athlete having to provide another sample. Step 4. Recording and certifying the information for samples. The bottle numbers are recorded on the doping control form, and the athlete checks the information is correct. The athlete's name does not appear on the documentation going to the laboratory with the samples. At this point, the athlete will be invited to declare any supplements or medication taken during the past 7 days, include any comments they have on the experience on the doping control form, and confirm if they give consent for their sample to be used in anonymous research. Step 5. Transferring the samples to the laboratory. Once the samples are placed in a security sealed transit bag, they are sent to a WADA-accredited laboratory for analysis. A secure chain of custody is maintained during the transport. Along with the sample, the laboratory receives an anonymised copy of the doping control form that contains information only relevant to the analysis. Step 6. Analysis. Once the sample arrives at the laboratory, the A sample is opened. The B sample is stored and is only used later if necessary. The lab conducts its analysis and then reports the results to UCAD or the relevant testing authority.
Okay, so hopefully, as I say, I think that's quite a succinct video that clearly goes through the testing process. I mean, there are a couple of things there that I noted as we went along, just to pick out. So on part of it, it said that you can request a delay in certain circumstances before providing your sample. We've spoken about the 100% Me app. And again, if you download that on your phone, that is another resource, and you can go onto that and it clearly lists the reasons that you can request a delay. Some examples are to attend a medal ceremony, or to warm down, or to go for medical treatment. They are reasons that you can request a delay when in competition. But as I say, the full list of those reasons are on your phone if you download that app as well. More information on it there. The other thing that I just wanted to pick out of the video was about the doping control form. And it said to note down your experience of the actual testing process. And what we would say, any comments, what I would say, if you've got any concerns as well. So if there are any concerns about how the testing process has been carried out, then please note them on that form, because it may be too late to raise them afterwards. And if you do have any concerns, and if you do note anything down on that form, let us know as well. So let myself and Millie know, because we can pass that on to UCAD, just to make sure that that information is being shared. And as I say, and if there are any concerns about it, then it can be dealt with. So it's really important that you note those down on the form before you leave. So that was just a couple of things, as I say, that I wanted to pick out of the video. So I'm moving on, and it's back to Millie.
Yeah, back to me. No fancy video on my slide, I'm afraid. It's just me again. So the testing pools, this is something which you may not be familiar with, you might have heard about, but you're probably not involved with yet. And it's something that you may become involved in as you progress through your cycling career. So ADAMS is the online system that athletes use to provide their whereabouts. And what we mean by whereabouts depends on which testing pool they're in. So there are 3 different testing pools which apply to cycling. So UCAD have 2. There's the domestic testing pool and the national registered testing pool. And the DTP requires those riders to provide their overnight accommodation, so where they're sleeping that night, their training schedule and their competitions. Now, those who are in the NRTP, which is still UCAD's testing pool, they do all of that plus 1 hour every single day of a location they're going to be at for that full hour. So a lot of athletes will provide it at like 6 o'clock in the morning, because they can provide it to be at home. They're going to be waking up, just having their breakfast. They know they're going to be at home. They have to be in that location for that whole hour. If a DCO turned up at 10 to 7, say your hour slot started at 6 till 7, and you weren't there, then you'll encounter a missed test. So it's really important that they can be there for that whole hour. The 3rd testing pool is the International Registered Testing Pool, and that's often referred to as UCI's testing pool. So that's the same as the NRTP in terms of requirements, but it's ran by the UCI and the ITA that look after their anti-doping. If you do get selected to go in the testing pool, you will be notified in advance. You don't just randomly one day get put on it and have to provide all your whereabouts. So you'll be notified. You usually would be notified to go into the DTP first. That's kind of how it usually works. So you go into that and then go on to the NRTP. And UCAD would notify you if you're going onto that. They'll help you do an induction and fill your first quarter in, because you fill your calendar in quarters of the year. And they'll help you complete that. And then they give you sort of a 2-week grace period to get used to it. So make those changes every day if you need to change it. And in addition to that, we'll be told, and we will help you for your first year. So we'll do checks every week. We'll have a look, go on your calendar. And if we see something that thinks that doesn't make sense at all, for example, you're sleeping in France tonight and tomorrow morning you're going to be in London at 6 o'clock, then we'll just send you an email and to alert your attention to it so you can have a look and make sure the details you provided are correct. So it's nothing to worry about. If you have any questions, if you're notified you're going to be added in any time to come, do get in touch. We're more than happy to help you out with it. It's not something to panic. Okay, so next one, please. So the anti-doping rule violations, so referred to as ADRBs. There are 11 of these now. There used to be 10, and this year another one got added. So when we've been talking about having a banned substance in your sample, that's kind of like one of the most common ADRBs you'll hear about, and probably what most people refer to as doping. So that's if you've been tested, you've given a sample, and when that sample's gone off to be tested, it's produced a result which has shown you've taken a prohibited substance that's on the prohibited list. But there are others. So if you go into your testing pool, as I spoke about just now, there are certain things that can happen which can result in ADRB. So for example, if you encounter 3 missed tests, so if you weren't there 3 times in your hour slot, then that would be an ADRB. There are other stuff, so prohibited association. So that could be if you were being coached by somebody who was currently serving an ADRB, then you can't be associated with that person. So engaging in coaching in that way with them. And then finally, the one on the bottom I just want to draw your attention to is the brand new one, which came this year in the 2021 code, and that's discouraging whistleblowing. This really shows the importance of reporting doping in sport. And Vicky's going to go on to that, so I'm not going to go on and on about the reporting methods. But now there is an ADRB. So if an athlete or an athlete support personnel does something to discourage somebody from whistleblowing doping, then they can end up with an ADRB, and it can result in a lifetime ban from sport. So there is a severe sanction with it as well. So it is one to be aware of, and do familiarise yourself with the different ADRBs. There are, as I say, there are now 11. The top 4 are those which only athletes can end up with, and then the remainder athletes and athlete support personnel can. So I shall hand back to Vic to talk about sanctions.
Cheers, Millie. I think it's me all the way to the end. Yeah, so very briefly to touch on sanctions. So it's unlikely and very difficult for an athlete to receive a ban of less than 2 years for unintentional doping. As Millie's always said in relation to supplements, but UCAD's message is assess the need, assess the risk, and assess the consequences. You know, it could be a 4-year ban that you would face for unintentional doping. New again to the code in 2021. So these are things that were introduced at the beginning of the year. A ban can be extended by another 2 years in certain circumstances. So, for example, the use of multiple prohibited substances at one time. However, they've also brought in something called result management agreements, which means that a ban of 4 or more years can be reduced by 1 year if the person admits to the ADRV and accepts the sanction within 20 days. So there is some flexibility there. I don't know whether flexibility is the right word to use, but some flexibility there in relation to the sanctions that are given, but not a great deal. However, rather than just talk about the bans, what I wanted to kind of go on to, and I think is really, really important to consider, is that when, you know, sport, when you're cycling is potentially one of the most significant parts of your life, the impact of doping, whether it's intentional or not, so even if it's unintentional, you know, you take a supplement that contains a banned substance and you didn't check it, it wasn't intended, but it's your responsibility to check. It's that notion of strict liability. So even in those circumstances, you know, the consequences of returning a positive sample and facing a ban are enormously destructive. You know, as I said, it's not just the ban, it's the health implications, but it's also the social consequences as well. So this slide just represents some of those consequences, you know, unwanted media and social media attention that you could face, the loss of potential or actual sponsorship deals that you have in place, a loss of income for some athletes, the removal of some of your achievements and those medals that you may have. There's potentially damage to relationships with friends and with family, isolation from peers and isolation from the sport, damage to future career prospects as well, whether that's within or even outside of the sport, and the effects actually on your own emotional and mental well-being as well as a result of, as I say, having an ADRB and being faced with that sanction. So yeah, there are wider implications than just receiving a ban. And although it's, you know, it's not the cheeriest of subjects to have to kind of present on, I think it's important that those are considered by yourselves and that you do remember that notion of strict liability. And when we talk about checking medications, when we talk about, you know, checking for TUEs and informed sport for supplements, that you really do that. It's really important. So, as Millie alluded to, we talked about the new ADRB and discouraging whistleblowing. If you saw someone who was nicking a car or stealing someone's bag, what would you do? You'd ring the police. So this is the notion, you know, if you knew that somebody was doping or if you had some information about doping, what would you do? And UCAD have developed, again, some new resources, a new campaign so that you do become aware of how to report any concerns or any information that you might have about doping in the sports. So you can email, there is a hotline, there's a encrypted WhatsApp number that you can use, there's an online form that you can go onto as well. WADA have their own campaign, so if you went onto the WADA website, you would find their own campaign that you can report doping through. But as I say, this one was launched by UCAD last year. And again, I've got a little video to show you, which means that UCAD can explain it via their video rather than me. So I'm very confident this will work, being as the last one did as well. You nearly had it again then. It's one of those where I think it's about to end and another little circle appears on the screen. Again, I think it's a clear message. You know, we've talked about testing being really important in the fight against doping. Education is really important, that you're aware of it, but reporting doping as well. And any concerns about trafficking or supply, or as I say, any concerns that you have about other individuals doping is really, really important in that fight for clean sport. So we've gone full circle. So I am now back virtually to the slide that we were at the beginning. And again, just having listened to us for, I don't know, potentially nearly an hour, just again, to consider where you are on that scale. It's impossible to give you all the information in that session. You know, we could do a session on one topic alone. So we have gone through a bit of a whistle stop tour, and it is a bit of a light touch in a lot of those areas. I just hope that for those that you were quite confident, that you knew about your responsibilities, maybe it's acted as a reminder, maybe it's just consolidated, you know, what you already knew. And for those that potentially, you know, were a little bit lower down the scale, I hope it's increased your knowledge, or, you know, it's highlighted the gaps in your knowledge, which I actually think is a really positive thing. So if you kind of identified the fact that maybe you don't know something as much as you thought you did, we've identified that, and you can go away and we've given you kind of those resources that you can look at. You can look at the UCAB website, you can download the 100% Me app, you can go on the WADA website, you can look at the prohibited list. There are loads of resources out there. You know, you can go onto the British Cycling website, and we've got our own anti-doping guidance that will signpost you to different areas and different information. So if you do think there's a gap in your knowledge, as I say, hopefully we've plugged a little bit. We've not got time to do it all, but hopefully we've plugged a little bit and just highlighted the areas that you might want to go away and look into a little bit further, because as we've said, it's the notion of, it's the principle of strict liability. You are responsible and you must be aware of your responsibilities and the anti-doping rules. So it's just really important that you do have a sound understanding of all that information. So the obligatory ending slide is a thank you all for listening, and are there any questions? We are happy to take questions today. I don't know whether anybody's put anything in the chat. We're very happy to take questions today, but also we'll leave you with our details, and I'm sure Phil will pass our details on so that you've got our contact emails and telephone numbers. And if there was anything that you didn't think of raising now, or you wanted to raise at a later date, we can do that. So thank you.
And thank you both to Vic and to Millie, and thank you for putting time aside this evening, sharing this, what I think is completely invaluable information with all the athletes tonight. So just to emphasize, are there any questions which people have got they'd like to open up their mics and ask, or type away?
Hi, I've got a question. You mentioned about a testing pool. At what level does testing pools kick in? What level do you get asked to go into a testing pool?
I'll take that. That was my slide. So it isn't in terms of being added to a testing pool, it isn't kind of our decision who goes onto it. So UCAD will make that decision. And it is kind of when you're competing nationally and going into international competitions as well. So it will depend on whether you were being added to DTP or NRTP as to when that was. You'd be competing like internationally if you're going into the NRTP. You know, we have people on programme that are on the testing pool and people who aren't. It really is, it's really difficult to say there's a set time when you would be added. It isn't kind of like you just work to it and you'll definitely be added. There's loads of different factors that are taken into account that you can assess and decide whether to add you into it or not. But as I say, it won't come as a today you're being added, so from tomorrow that's it. You know, we are here to support you through that, and you do get that sort of 2-week grace period at the start as well. So do shout out, you know, if you are being added to it and you want any assistance there, but UCAD and ourselves will support you. So that isn't, sorry, it's not a definitive answer, is it? I haven't, it's a bit of a waffly answer, but sorry, we're going to ask again.
Sorry, I've got a follow on from that.
Yeah.
So if you're not on a testing pool, would that prevent you from doing any international competitions, particularly for GB?
No, so it wouldn't prevent you from entering into certain competitions. It's not that you will be asked as to whether you are, I'm not aware of any competition that would ask you for that. It's just that UCAD would look at kind of like how you're progressing. So, you know, if you are in international competitions and they're seeing you getting their results, they may add you in because you're obviously progressing quite quickly through your sporting career. But it won't necessarily stop you competing in any events at all. And it isn't something to kind of, I know sometimes people panic when they get an attitude and see it as a hassle, because it is, you know, it is a lot of work. But it's kind of a good thing as well. You know, you're being recognised for your achievements there, you're being added into the testing pool. So there's positives to be taken from it in that way, but it isn't taken as to hold you back, you know, if you're in it or you're not in it in that way.
Yeah, but not being in it wouldn't hold you back.
No.
Even if you wanted to be in and just hadn't been asked. That was more the angle I was thinking about.
Yeah, you can't ask to be added, so you couldn't, you know, you couldn't ask UCAD to add you, but it won't. You not being in it does not hold you back in progressing.
Yeah.
Millie might tell me if I'm wrong here, but for some reason I have a feeling that there are about 500 athletes in the testing pool, which she's looking, I don't know if she knows or not, but I'm sure there are about 500 athletes in the testing pool, and that's across all sports. So on the scale of things, Lorna, it's not a massive amount of athletes across all the sports. So no, it's not going to hold anyone back at all.
No. I don't know the number, but yeah, I imagine it is something like that, like Vic said, because as I say, there will be people on programme that are in it and not in it. So it's not a negative or positive in that way.
And just to be really annoying,
yeah,
it mentioned on one of the videos that if you were called up for testing, that you had to provide ID, and it said, e.g., passport or driver's license. I know that I certainly don't go around the country with my passport and driver's license, so I wouldn't necessarily expect everybody to do so. Would, for their case, a BC license do the trick on that, or what would happen if you didn't have that ID is what my question is.
Good question. Do you know what? I don't actually know the answer, but I will find out, to be fair, because you still can't. It's not a reason. Well, it is a reason to do. It's a reason to delay. So you can delay to go and get your ID.
If you're willing to do the test, but you just don't have the ID, is the point.
You need your ID. So it's a reason to delay. Let me start again. You can request to delay to go and get your ID. Now, whether or not you would be chaperoned until you could go and fetch them appropriate
trip and down the country.
Well, potentially.
Thing as well, kind of it runs through to the strict liability, you know, and it doesn't start making it sound as if there's so much more work you have to do as an athlete. But it is that thing, you know, if you're going to an event, I would say definitely take your ID with you, you know, because that's somewhere you're likely to be tested, for example. It's kind of remembering and getting used to that kind of thing, that you might now have to start carrying your ID on you a bit more. Do you know what I mean? So that it's kind of an additional responsibility, which actually is a great thing, because as Vic said before, you know, it's not a negative being tested. It is, you know, it's a good thing that you're getting called for testing. So I don't know the answer to, I'm with Vic, I don't know the answer, but
my experience at a race with athletes is that when they get called for testing, and they get called basically as they've crossed the line, usually by notification with their number, then they are chaperoned back to a team place where you would expect to have your ID of some sort, and then you're taken back to have the testing done. So that's what tends to, that I've seen happen quite often in races at under 23 level. where they do provide a chaperone to go and get your ID. And, you know, if you've travelled abroad, you're going to have your passport anyway. So that's been my experience.
You would be chaperoned at all points if there's a reason to delay. So in those circumstances, yeah, you would be filled. I mean, if it's a 5-hour round journey, Lorna, then I don't know, to be honest. We go through different scenarios. We did some training with UCAD last year, and we talked about different scenarios. And one was, it wasn't in relation to ID, but it was one, a doping control officer turns up and you've said that you're going to help your sister out and she can't pick up a child from school, and you've got to go to school and school can't hang out. You know, what are you going to do? Because you can't refuse a test, but you have got to go and pick that child up from school. And it was talking around that scenario. And again, it was, well, it's not a reason to delay, but in those circumstances, you might be chaperoned whilst you go and do that until you can actually do the test, but you'd be observed and chaperoned throughout. So yeah, it's not exactly the same as what you've raised about the ID, but it's along those lines that, you know, you will be observed until you can comply with what is required to do the test. But we will ask the question.
Yeah, if you could get back to us, that'd be useful.
Sorry. Yeah. Sorry, Laura, have you finished?
Yeah, sorry, yeah, that's me done.
There's a question from Sam in the chat box. He says, do the rules change much between countries?
You want this one or shall I?
No, go on then, you go.
It depends what you mean, Sam. If you're referring to like the prohibited list, so the World Anti-Doping Code is applicable internationally, and there are certain standards as well. So there's like the international testing standard. I think is it 8 different international standards? So different, like they're kind of like codes. So there's like the testing standard, and then for your TUEs, and they're international, so they apply worldwide. So that wouldn't change. If you're referring to testing pools, obviously if they're run by UCAD, then other anti-doping organisations, for example, USADA, I don't know exactly kind of how theirs work, so that might be slightly different, but the core principles really are the same. And actually, in terms of what's prohibited, really is the same internationally. Obviously, that goes with a word of warning. If you're using Global DRO, as I said, it only works for medications prescribed or bought in 7 countries. So if you are going away, for example, if you were competing internationally, perhaps take kind of like a first aid kit of certain things you've checked, you know are fine, and can take with you, so that you know those checks are done and you're not having to panic when you're in Spain, for example, and can't check those medications.
Again, just to echo that, if we've understood you right, Sam, as say, WADA is kind of the overarching organisation, and the very purpose of having that World Anti-Doping Code is to ensure that, you know, every athlete in every country, so different nationalities, are all competing on a fair playing field, so that the rules and the regulations are all pretty much consistent, so that everybody has to abide by the same rules. Yeah.
Can I just ask a question then? What's the minimum age at which testing can take place?
I'm not sure actually. Do you know what the youngest is that you can be tested? Obviously, no. It's catered for under 18s. So as Vic mentioned, you know, you can have a chaperone with you when you're under 18 in that way. But I'm not sure what the minimum would be, to be honest. But it's like, sorry, that's really unhelpful.
But it could be under 18. So by example, an athlete that's a national championship could be subject to testing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm writing down my list of questions.
Everybody in the call would be over 16, so they'd be at junior level in cycling terms. And I just wanted to be clear for everybody that anybody competing at national level then or anywhere as a junior is subject to testing.
Yeah. And just kind of to reinforce that point as well, you know, even as a British cycling member, you are bound by the World Anti-Doping Code as well. You have anti-doping responsibility. So, you know, even if you're not competing, you are bound by that. So it is important that, you know, obviously we want to come here today for you guys as you're progressing through your cycling career and progressing your racing, because you are going to start to encounter this a lot more. You know, you might start encountering testing a lot more than you have done already. And I don't know if anyone here has been tested or not before, but everyone could be. So it is important you kind of understand that procedure so that you probably feel more comfortable as well for your first time.
I've been with teams in Belgium where under 16s have been tested.
Yeah.
Phil, before I came into cycling, I worked in golf, and I know we had a 15-year-old who was tested in golf. So I don't know how young they go, but yeah, definitely under 18.
Yeah, they definitely go. Yeah.
This is 4 or 5 years ago, because they post the numbers up after the race in terms of who we tested, and they were definitely under 16 events.
Yeah.
I think Heather's hand up. I think.
Sorry, Heather.
I'm not very good at Zoom, so it might not be.
It's just going on, following on from that, really. That so is what's the best advice then, that everyone should download that Clean Sport app?
I'm an absolute huge fan. I think it's makes all the information really, really clear. If you've never seen it, it's great. I've
just had a look now. It's actually, I'm quite impressed because if you put in cycling, it brings up your details.
I was just about to say it's sport specific, so you can put in cycling, and yeah, I think it's just really easy to navigate through. So if it was a query about TUEs, it's really easy to get there, and as I say, it's all bite-sized pieces of information. So yes, I am a big fan. So I would say if that's what you're going to take away from this, download the app and get it on your phone.
It's available in Apple and also on Android, and we've posted both links into the Facebook group.
Yeah, thank you.
I think just on that as well is, start with that app. It's a great place to start. It's got so much information in there. But as well, we're here for you. You know, we are here to offer as much advice as we can and support. So you've met us now virtually. That's the way the world is nowadays. So you do know who we are. Please don't be afraid to email us any questions. We're more than happy to help and do what we can. And as we said, if we don't know the answer, then we will ask UCAD.
And as we've proved, we don't know the answers.
No.
So there we go.